On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. To discover the best in events and performances, visit blumenthalarts.org.
Learned through that time is all we got. And that day I thought my life was going one way, the next day it completely changed. So when I deal with people as coaching clients or in organizations, I take that philosophy to say, what is it that you want to do? And you may not have time to do it. I mean, you may not have all the time in the world to keep doing this the wrong way. So let's focus on what you could do differently. Or if someone wants a different job, I really make a lot out of that because it's your only life and it's your time. So my time, and at my age and given that experience, I don't do what I don't want to do. When you ask if there's a client that's not a fit, if I think it's not a fit, I will tell them fairly early on because this is my time and my life.
Karen Geiger develops leaders for the 21st century workplace. She is a leadership and organizational development advisor and executive coach. Over a 25-year career as owner of Karen Geiger Associates, Karen has helped corporate and nonprofit leaders diagnose and adapt to rapidly changing workplace issues and challenges. Along with her client service work, she has directed leadership programs and taught MBA and executive leadership courses at the McColl Graduate School of Business at Queen's University. Karen previously served as Senior Vice President for Work Family Programs at NationsBank, now Bank of America. In this episode, Karen talks about leadership in the workplace and lessons learned from overcoming trauma that can help us in our lives and careers. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's great to have you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Karen, you have a company that serves corporate clients. What do you do for them?
I help them as leaders mobilize people to solve tough problems, and that ends up being several things. One is helping them define the problems. Two is assessing whether the leaders are effective in mobilizing people. And then third, are the people doing what they want them to do?
How do you organize your company to deliver those services?
What I start with is an assessment that's usually before we sign the contract, because I want to get clear on what the problem is, whether I'm the right person, and what I could do about it. My favorite clients are the ones that tell me the problem and I propose a solution. If they already know the solution, we have to first talk about whether that's right. And because many times people think training is the answer when I don't agree. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about all that before I even do the proposal.
And what are the range of services that you offer?
Consulting, coaching, some research, and tools that enable HR and people and other consultants to help them.
Let's walk through a scenario. A company hires you to help them with leadership development. How do you go about the work?
Well, first, that's a general statement. So I'd first say, what do you mean by leadership development? Leadership's one of those words that was created on the ground and became studied later. So everybody means something different by leadership. So I'd first say, in that answer to that question, what do you mean and what do you want to develop and who are the leaders you're talking about? And that gets into usually a great conversation about what is it they want to do. And sometimes it turns out that there might be a structural change that would solve the problem or a strategy change. So it isn't leadership. When you think of leadership development, people think of training. And I usually I used to teach in my classes, there's a study done at the Center for Creative Leadership years ago that said they asked executives, how did you learn what was most important to learn to make you successful? The top one was on-the-job experience. Second one was other people. Third one was hardship. The last one, which got single-digit percents, was training. So training is really only rhetoric unless things are happening outside the session that bolster what you're doing inside.
Why would people hire you? Why hire Karen Geiger?
People hire me if they want to be able to be dead honest about what's going on and hear dead honesty back. If they know the answer already and want to price shop or just talk to 10 different people, usually I'm not one that's considered. I usually get called by people who know that that's what they'll get. And they'll come at it. It's a pretty high-level conversation. I don't do strategic planning workshops. I don't do template workshops. I usually am presented with a problem, and then I help them craft a solution. I'm not looking for international fame, but people can meet me at a conference and pretty much get that feel for me. So I do pretty well at face-to-face. People get who I am and what I do.
What are common leadership issues that you are encountering?
Usually the most common is a belief system that's based on one's life experience, which we all have, but the belief system is not working in the current context. So somebody might think that they just want to be around people who are positive with them and are focused on the positive aspects of the vision, but then they hit a negative person who's a very high performer and they don't want to work with them or they want to criticize them. So what we would work on in that case with the leader is, how do you see that person and why does that get in your way? So sometimes it evolves into coaching. Other times I worked with a nonprofit whose board was huge, and the board, with a huge board, they would sit back and clap at every board meeting at what the staff did. And that's fine in some ways, but then the staff wanted the board to be thinking partners. So we needed to take the board down and get some different people on the board who would do that. So it depends on what the problem is as to what the solution is. I think one issue that's arising more is demographic or generational differences, I guess I could say. There's a woman named Tammy Erickson who's done some great work on generations, and she says what was happening in your adolescence can maybe lead to a worldview. And millennials, for example, what was happening for them as adolescents was 9/11, Columbine, and they're not sure there is a tomorrow in their gut, so they are not really interested in long-term bonus plans, long-term incentives, vacation that builds up over time. They want things now. My generation of baby boomers likes to criticize them to say they have no work ethic, but they actually do. They just have a different one. So I was talking to a healthcare organization saying that their doctors want all their money up front, and they can't do that. So they want to think about how to adapt to what people see and structure things around it. I think that's one. Another is just, there's a book called The Watchman's Rattle that I think is good reading for everybody, where she says that before many civilizations collapsed, and that's extreme, the level of complexity of the problems did not match the level of complexity with which they were talked about. Like immigration is a problem, a wall is a simple solution. The problem is much more complicated than that. So how do we talk about problems and allow complexity in the room when our culture demands fast, clear answers? And I think that's a common issue too, that when something's complex, how do we develop the patience and the time and space to just let it be complex?
Do you introduce systems thinking into a relationship with a client?
It's always a system. That's one of my philosophies. Somebody, when I was at NCNB years ago, somebody might be a poor performer in a job, but we'd move them to a different job and they'd be outstanding. So that's not the person. It's the circumstance around them or the nature of the work or the people around them. And I think it's always, and right now you have to consider customers, right now weather, your beliefs, and it's all part of a system.
Do you use assessment tools in your work?
I do. I develop surveys myself, but I use a fantastic new tool called PXT Select that is a hiring tool and then an onboarding and development tool. That's my current exciting tool that I have a lot of clients interested in, and because of this generational issue, fit becomes important now. That you can be hired, but millennials are looking for other jobs. The average length of tenure of a millennial is like 1.8 years. So if you want people to stay and keep the institutional memory, you need to work harder at making sure there's a fit between them and the role, between them and their manager, and between them and their team. And that instrument does it all. Then I use things like DISC, Myers-Briggs, situational leadership, the library of things that you're probably familiar with. Mm-hmm. But I don't come in with solutions. If that looks like it fits, I use it.
How long is a typical engagement?
It could be anywhere from 6 months to 4 years. I mean, if it's a long-term issue, I'll stay with it until the job is done. And I will see when it's time for me to leave also.
How do you know when the job is done?
I think my job as a consultant is to put myself out of a job. I never want the client to be dependent on me, so I will work with the existing people behind the scenes as much as I can, and when I think they're capable of doing what we designed, I call it. And I'll say, I think you're good. I can wean them and say, just call me periodically if you need to talk, but I think you got this.
What if the issue is with the management team that retained you?
It often is. But what I do is set a tone, a safe environment for them to look at themselves and acknowledge that for themselves. I don't come in critical, but I ask good questions that get them to say, maybe that's not working. So it's a match of theirs, and there usually is a related problem. There's no problem with management style unless there's an effect of it. So I'll come in and asking about effects, and they'll see it is with me. So I think the best feedback that's given is, what did you do? What was the effect? Both positive and negative.
Have you ever recommended to the team that hired you that maybe one or more of them should step aside?
Yes. I worked with a nonprofit years ago. I told the board, if you let this person go, I would not even want to take their place because you're not clear on what you want and you're putting this person at risk with your lack of clarity. So I'd fix your template first. Then, depending on what you come up with, I'm not sure this is right. But the problem, like you said, is the system. The problem was the system in that place, in that case. And I will not recommend that someone is fired or go away because I believe it is a system. I think it's too easy for someone to decide, well, there's the problem. It's a person, like the you're fired solution. But if the person's been told things and they're not doing them and they know it, then yeah, they should move on. Usually, when I work with coaching clients, they know it's time to leave.
What do good leaders do?
Diagnose and adapt.
Tell me more.
Look around and see what's going on. Is your style working? Is your strategy working? And if it's not, adapt. And if you're good at diagnosing and reading people and good at adapting on the fly, you're probably leading well. It's just an awareness of how you're coming across. And I think that can be developed in someone. It's scary for some people because some people are scared to think that they might be, quote, wrong. But it's really just a matter of saying it's not changing your personality. It's just this one time or with this one person. And I had that happen to me in one organization I was in. There was a person that I worked with who I could tell didn't like me and it wasn't working. And I worked with a coach, and the coach said to me, you come in like a ton of bricks to their office, and you say, I need to talk about this problem, and you think you're being direct, and you think that's really good. That person is thinking they're threatened by your directness, and so what I learned is direct and blunt is not always the right way, and that was a great lesson for me to learn. And for me, it's just a matter of what results do I want, and am I getting them?
What are signs of poor leadership?
I think first, not looking around to see how you're coming across, not being open to being wrong, not matching the way you're leading to the nature of the problem. There's a lot of work around problem types. If you were to fall over right now and break your leg, I would not pull a group together and ask what people thought I should do. We'd call 911. That's one type of problem. Another type of problem is we know there's a problem. We know what the problem is, but we're not sure what the solution is. Then you bring more people in and talk. There's another type of problem that says we don't know what the problem exactly is. Like you could say the weather is a complex problem. We don't know a lot about it. And we don't know what a solution is. That's when you bring everybody together and sit back, put your feet up, and everybody scratches their heads together. So you have to resist. If you're a poor leader, if in that circumstance you want to be a type 1 problem solver and a type 3 problem.
Do you think academic leadership theory sometimes muddles good decision making?
Absolutely. And I don't bring academics into my consulting. I think academics are very useful to have it built in me sustained thinking. And I do notice that it would help if business and organizations would let themselves have sustained thinking more often without getting muddy. But the challenge of academia is to talk in a way that people can grasp who don't think that long about things. that's a challenge. It's worthy on that side, but when you talk to people who have a to-do list, they don't want to hear the definition of terms all day long.
Is there a philosophy of leadership that guides what you do?
I think that the complexity theory and systems thinking guides what I do. Complexity theory says that, like I said about the problem types, but if you really sit back before you decide what the problem is and say, let's think about that, that's the approach I take. And it's never. And the problem with leadership is people think it's a person. It's a process of having a vision, aligning followers, and interacting with them. And that's how I see it.
Systems theory often looks for leverage points that could have disproportionate impacts across the system. Mm-hmm. How do you introduce that into a company?
I would take the systems thinking knowledge I have and never use the academic terms, but ask questions about that. Like, how does this group see this? How does the structure, how effective is it? I just turned it into understandable questions, and then they start seeing a picture of the system. And sometimes we'll even draw it and see what the leverage points are and what the relationships are. I got the feedback when I was at the bank a long time ago that I'm a truth teller, and that was a problem in case I were assigned to talk to the press. So I take that feedback and I accept it. I don't want to talk to the press if I can't tell the truth. But I think what I do is bring questions to the table and make things understandable so that problems can be solved effectively. And that is not a clear business elevator speech, but that's not the nature of my business.
Mm-hmm. Karen, let's talk about how you came to be who you are today. Talk to me about where you grew up.
I grew up in New Jersey, in a town called Ridgewood, where my father and mother were pretty traditional. We got to watch, you need to know this about me, we got to watch the Miss America pageant every year when I was 5 with my sisters. And I think, I'm not sure they would agree, but I think that they were raising us to be wives of New York executives, to be poised and gracious, and none of us became that. But growing up in New Jersey, there's a certain directness to that culture that I think I absorbed, and I had to learn how to moderate it. But I lived in the same house for all 18 years of my childhood, and I was the one who welcomed the new people to Ridgewood.
What was your dad and mom like?
My father was a musician before he went into business, and he was an introverted, serious, really dedicated father. My mother was an extrovert, is an extrovert. She's 92, and she's still with us. She still lives in that house. She was much more extroverted and also really committed to women. And having 3 daughters, she was a feminist before feminism. She just there was no question if you wanted to do something, you could do it. And I just really appreciate that about her, that none of us question anything we want to do. It's just a matter of making the time and energy to do it.
How are you like them?
I'm a lot like my mother in my refusal to take orders. We'll laugh about that. We like to say you're not the boss of me and laugh about it. My father was very feeling-oriented, and so am I. He was the one I could talk to about anything I was struggling with, and he would always make time to listen, and he loved music, and so do I.
How would others have described you in high school?
I was in the marching band, I was in the orchestra, probably a smart nerd. I was not interested in boys at that point. I wasn't interested in dating. I just was I loved my studies, I loved learning, and I loved music. So I had a few good friends, and I was very happy with that.
Where did you go to college?
University of Rochester. I started out as a music major at Eastman, and I had an audition that taught me a lot, where I thought I was horrible in the audition. I probably was. And they said to me after the audition, all right, let's work with you, then we'll try it again. So that's what we did. And when I was done with the second run through, they came up to me and said, we're just going to tell you right now you're in. And I said, are you kidding me? I was horrible. And they said, I know, but they said, we'd rather have someone who's teachable than someone who comes in good that we can't teach. And that taught me a lot. And I feel like that translates into leadership now, is it's just if you're teachable. You don't have to be perfect, but we have this standard in our society about being perfect. So I started out as a music major, and I spent 2 years at Eastman until I realized I just wasn't as devoted to it. I didn't want to jam on a Friday night. So I had taken a sociology class that I loved, and I ended up changing my major to that and continuing to take lessons with my clarinet teacher.
So you played clarinet.
Yeah.
Do you still play?
Well, I did, but I was injured in Hurricane Hugo, and I lost my breath because I had stomach surgery. So I couldn't play after that.
And in fact, as we record, today is the anniversary of Hurricane Hugo, isn't it?
It is 28 years ago. Not that I'm counting. 28 years ago, I was in Tampa giving a speech at a conference for the bank. And I was going to fly back on the bank plane, but the bank plane pilot said, oh, they left while they could. And we thought, what? And then we flew back into black clouds above and below us. And it was quite a day. And then that night, a tree fell on my house and fell on me in the house. All the news now about hurricanes, I know what people are going through. When people say they want to stay and ride it out, I say, you apparently haven't been through one.
So your injuries were severe?
Yeah. My foot broke, my pelvis broke, my ribs broke, my kidney was lacerated, my spleen was taken out, my lungs collapsed. And I was in the hospital in ICU for 2 weeks and in the hospital for 6.
What is the significance of that traumatic event for you and your career and your life since?
Well, one thing is, and this is easier for me to talk about than just my work without my life as context, but I learned through that time is all we got. And that day I thought my life was going one way, the next day it had completely changed. So when I deal with people as coaching clients or in organizations, I take that philosophy to say, what is it that you want to do? And you may not have time to do it. I mean, you may not have all the time in the world to keep doing this the wrong way. So let's focus on what you could do differently. Or if someone wants a different job, I really make a lot out of that because it's your only life and it's your time. So my time, and at my age and given that experience, I don't do what I don't want to do. And you ask if there's a client that's not a fit. If I think it's not a fit, I will tell them fairly early on because this is my time and my life. So I'm very careful about who I work with, how I work with them, and I really love my days because I'm on my calendar are only things I like to do and I feel like I'm good at.
Do you ever find yourself when you're talking to a client about a business issue and your intuition tells you that you need to have a more personal conversation with them about their life choices or business choices? Do you go there?
Yes. I can read people, I think, really well. Like in the hospital, I called a relationship between a doctor and a nurse before they had told anybody, just saying. But the person usually comes to me because they know that they'll trust me to do that. But if they're talking and I'm reading that there's something else on their mind or something else going on, I'll just tell them what I observed or ask them a question about it because that's all fair. Anywhere our minds go is fair game, in my view, because sometimes our intuition speaks and we don't accept it. But if it's there, let's hear what it is and maybe go with it.
Can you share an example, perhaps, of when your intuition helped you with a client and it made a significant difference?
If someone's talking to me and it's clear to me that they're giving me the company line and the whole look on their face and their energy level says they think something else, I'll point that out and say, tell me what you would tell your husband or tell me what you'd tell your wife, to ask them really what's going on. And usually the truth is under there and we just don't listen to it. And that's what I think, if we would all let that stuff come out and be on the table, we're usually right, is what I think.
You were at the bank when Hurricane Hugo occurred.
Yes.
Did it lead to any changes in your career or what you thought was important or what was next for you?
Yes. In fact, Hugo, there's a book called Sacred Contracts that I love, and it's Carolyn Meese wrote it, and what she says is just, regardless of your religious beliefs, think about this. What if you were sitting with a group of people and you got presented different life circumstances with different people and you chose this life, then you took a potion that made you forget that you had done that. And everything in your life is there to teach you something that you could not have learned any other way. So yes, what I learned then, I was saying to my husband before Hugo happened, I was loving my job, loving the bank, traveling a lot. I had 2 small kids. I had 2 and 4 were my 2 boys' ages. And I was traveling. I said to my husband, I feel like I'm on a roller coaster that I love. I just can't stop it. Then that night, Hugo happened. Because that week I was in Boston and Tampa, and I was headed for San Antonio. So what I did is I came back much more focused on the whole person I wanted to be, and I worked a reduced schedule for a while, and then ended up advocating at the bank for other women who wanted to do that, mostly women, some men. So I created select time as an option, and work-family issues became my job, and then I built the child care center. I managed the project that built the child care center. So that became, because I had a CEO, Hugh McColl, who listened. And when I would say something, he would listen, like he did with many people. And so we kind of made it so that people could show up and have their whole selves at work.
Let's go back a bit to that career trajectory that you were on. You were at the University of Rochester. You were studying sociology. Why sociology?
I just loved it. And I think looking back, it's my work now. I like looking at groups and looking at how people behave in groups and what the groups are doing together. And I just love the subject. There was a class called sociolinguistics that I loved that said that your language determines your worldview. So we have a cultural problem because in English, love means everything. Like I love you, I love that sweater, I love Coke. But in other languages, there are many different words for love. So we get confused because we're told we're loved and we don't know exactly what it means. So I just found that subject. I loved every course I took in it.
You went off to graduate school.
I did.
And what did you choose to do?
Well, after college, I worked at the Boston Symphony Orchestra as a secretary because I worked for a temp agency, and they said, "Oh, you were at Eastman. We'll send you to fill in here." So I went and filled in, and I ended up loving the people, and I got to work in Symphony Hall, which was a joy. But after a year and a half of that, I was feeling like I was more ambitious than being a glorified secretary. So I had a good friend from Rochester who lived in Boston who said to me, he said one day, "You need to go," because I thought student affairs was going to be my career. So he said, "You need to go where," I said, "I go to Northeastern." And he said, "No, you need to go where the best program is, and that's Indiana." So I flew to Indiana for my interview, and the plane landed at what looked like a gas station in the middle of a field, and I freaked out. But I ended up going there to graduate school, and I was an Easterner there. I loved it there. I learned to slow down and not to always feel like I was doing something. And the degree was in college student personnel administration. My advisor was Betty Greenleaf, who was the grandmother of the field. And she sat down with me before I graduated, and she goes, "I just feel like you're not going to stay in this field." And I wasn't sure how to take that. And she said, "I just think you're destined for more than this." And I was recruited to UNC Charlotte after that to run a residence hall. So that's what I did. That's why I got here. And I lasted 2 years, and then I decided I had all the fun I could have with 18 to 20-year-olds because I was living in the dorm, and I was dating the man that's my husband now, and I wasn't allowed to be with him much after 11. So I stayed there for a couple of years, and I left there because the philosophy was changing there, and I didn't subscribe to it because in residence halls, philosophies are either housing or student development or safety, and I was a student development philosophy, and the new manager was housing. So we had to take more care of whether the walls were painted or the ceiling tiles were in place, and that just wasn't how I wanted to spend my time. So I left without a job because you just don't renew your contract. And then again, I was being a secretary in Charlotte, just biding my time, waiting for something. I was interviewing at other schools around the country, Binghamton, Temple, and McAllister College, and none of them were really fitting me. And then I worked as a temporary secretary at NCNB for a man named Walter Elcock, and he was checking me out, I think, without me knowing it. And then in November that year, he called and said, "You want to talk turkey?" This trainer he had working for him was leaving, so everything was happenstance.
Checking out in a professional context.
Yes. He would come in the computer room and just ask me questions. And they were kind of like interview questions, but he was saying, "You have a master's degree and you're a secretary? How does that work?" And I was saying, "Well, that's how my life's going."
You were hired by the bank.
Yep, as a management trainer. That was the same year McColl became CEO. And
for those who don't know, who was Hugh McColl?
Hugh McColl was the CEO of NCNB. He was changing the culture dramatically when I got there. I didn't know that. But he would say things like, "I don't trust my lieutenants. They're too invested in being my lieutenants." So he would go over them and ask people under them what they thought of things. So he would ask me questions and I'd answer them. And I think he would do that consistently. And he was just an excellent leader. In my view, he has a reputation that the press has created, I'm sure, over time. But He was the most human. He could read people really well, and he would figure people out before they could figure themselves out. He was brilliant, and it was an honor to work for him.
Talk more about his leadership style.
He would be blunt if he needed to be, and you would know what he thought, so he was very clear. But for example, one day I had put in place a child care subsidy for lower income employees, and he had talked to a teller one day, and she said, I turned down a raise because it knocks me out of the subsidy program, and that's more valuable to me than my raise. So he called me not happy, and he said, fix that. We can't have people turning down raises. We're an organization that wants high performers, so fix it. Well, I didn't know that was happening. So it's great that he did that, and so we created a grandfather plan so you could ease your way out so it wasn't worth more, and that was valuable. He also personally came up to me one time and said, I don't see you on the golf course, and power isn't shared until we know what you're going to do with it, so how do we get to know you? And that was a great question. I don't play golf, nor am I interested in playing golf. And I told him that. And I said, and here's the deal. I travel for you 2 weeks a month doing training, and I have 2 small children. I'm not giving you Saturdays. So this is my life. And he listened to that and then said, well, how do we get to know you? That question was important. And I said, well, Damon and I like going to movies. Go to a movie with us. And he said, all right. He walked out, and then 2 weeks later, he called me on a Wednesday and said, what are you doing tonight? And I said, well, oddly enough, we're going to a movie. He goes, well, Jane and I will join you. And I thought that was wonderful because he was adapting, like I said before. He asked me why I'm not on the golf course. Well, there's a reason. And then here's how to get to know me. And he did. And then when Hugo happened, the bank was self-insured, and he was incredibly generous and would come over and just talk to me as I recovered. And so he just is, to me, the example of leadership effectively.
You worked at the bank for several years.
I was 12.
And your last job was as senior vice president, leadership development.
It was director of work family programs, because this whole child care thing had gone crazy. Because women became 51% of the workforce a few years before that, so it became a relevant issue, and it helped McColl buy banks because this made him a softer image. So I was given all the resources I needed. It was awesome.
But you decided to leave.
I did for 2 reasons. One is the bank was getting bigger. It had become NationsBank. I don't like, nor do I do well in bureaucracies. It was not a bureaucracy before that, but that was going on, and I just found that I don't want people to approve my memos before I send them, kind of thing. Second reason, which might have been more important, is that my older son was really struggling with what happened during Hugo, because he saw the tree come in on me, and he was really struggling. And I couldn't be the kind of mother I wanted to be with the job I had, because we had built the child care center here, and McColl was saying, oh, let's build one in Dallas and Atlanta and Maryland, and I wasn't home enough now. And so I waited until the child care center was finished, and I wasn't leaving anybody in the lurch, and I told him why. I told him it's because of Adam, and I need to go be a mom, and being a consultant was more predictable in terms of schedule. So there were both 2 reasons why, and I think that's another reason Hugo happened, because it taught me I'm really happy on my own.
Sounds like you invited Hugo into your life.
Well, I don't know. If you take the sacred contracts approach, I did. And I couldn't have learned those lessons any other way, because I was determined to be, quote, successful, whatever that meant. And I loved the bank, and I couldn't say no to it. And so that really did cause me to think differently.
What did you do next?
I consulted. I tried to figure it out for a year, and then the McColl School of Business called me because there was a professor there that wasn't working with the executive MBA students, and a few people had met, and someone in the group said, we need someone like Karen Geiger. And so they said, well, who's that? And then they said, well, she lives in Charlotte, and they told them about me, because they presented me as having street knowledge, and I would not be too academic where the other guy was. So I got a call from the director of the academic executive MBA program, and he said, would you come fill in? And I said, I'll fill in until you find somebody. And then I stayed for 20 years. I found I loved it.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to be a better leader?
I'd say I'd check first to say, what does that mean to you, and are you in the right organization doing the right thing. Because if you're in the wrong place, you need to probably go somewhere else where you can be yourself. So first is, what do you mean by better leader? Is it that you're not heard? Is it that you're not effective? Is your influence not strong enough? Is your life balance not right? I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why someone could say that. So before we start going down any path, I'd ask them, we have a lot of questions about what that means. Usually it's about being able to put yourself away and read other people and see how you're coming across, be open to feedback, and I will cause people as an assignment to ask people how they come across and just be quiet, say thank you, and walk away. And no, don't get defensive, don't explain what your intentions were, just listen. So first, are they diagnosing? And then adapting. Adapting's hard work. Trying on a different style is hard, or saying something differently. If I'm talking to someone who I know is, like McColl was you don't want to talk more than 30 seconds to him. So, like one time I asked him for $1 million more to do the child care center. And I went in and I think I said 15 seconds worth of conversation about why I needed it. And he just said, go. That's not something he did every day, but you just know your person. He doesn't need all the detail to get to your conclusion. He wants to hear a conclusion, and then if he asks you a question, you can answer it. So when you're with people like that, you need to be brief. If you're with someone else who wants all the detail, you need to know that and give them detail, which increases the rapport between people.
Is there an ambition you have at this stage in your work?
I'm at a point now where I know there's something new coming, and I don't know what it is. I love what I do. It works for my lifestyle. I have a new granddaughter, and I have a mother who's 92, and a mother-in-law who's 85, and a father-in-law who's 90. So we have family things to pay attention to. But at some point when the family needs calm down, I feel like the world is going to need me to take a more active role in one of the complicated problems we face. I don't know which one it'll be. Today is also an anniversary of Keith Lamont Scott's shooting. Race is what I did my dissertation on. I'm interested in that, particularly the bubble that people of privilege have around them. I have to figure out what role I'm going to play in something like that. I can only watch it for so long, but I don't know what that is yet. And I'm in a time of hibernation, I think. I had Hugo happen. I had a house fire. I raised a son who was struggling a lot with post-traumatic stress. I had a car accident. Those shaped me as much as anything. I mean, raising my son is one of the greatest achievements of my life, because he could have been on the dark side, and you couldn't have told me that wasn't true when he was about 12 or 13. So we moved heaven and earth to get him the help he needed, and that shapes who I am also. And that taught me, sacred contracts wise, that, for example, what he needed from us was way more structure than we typically give. Like if I would say, as a minor example, if I said to him, get ready for bed, what does that mean? And he'd go in his room and just stare at the air for an hour. Well, I didn't say, get your pajamas on, get a towel, go take a bath. That's what getting ready for bed means. And that's a way of talking where we thought there was a problem somewhere. We knew there was a problem somewhere between us, but then Hugo happens and he's lost his trust in adults because everyone said I was not coming here. And then he watched me under the tree, he used to say, that's the night the outside came in. And he really struggled for a long time, and we went to therapy every week for 10 years. I found a therapist who said, the family is coming, not Adam. Because the family is a system that is going to recover here. And so we all participated in creating. I didn't want him to think he's a problem, but we all went and we dealt with all of our issues together. And so my family is really important to me because we know each other deeply through that. And my work is a part of my life, but it's not the central part. It's one of the things I love to do, and I make sure I love it. I will never retire. In fact, I'm doing a retreat. A friend of mine, a colleague, Linda Christopherson, and I are doing a retreat in the fall in the mountains for 6 women as a trial called The Third Chapter, based on the book by Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, where we're going to plan our next chapter because we're not going to retire. So how do I want to live out my next 30 years if I have 30?
Your son's name's Adam.
Yeah, Adam and Michael are my sons.
Okay. And just to help understand, what was the issue with your son?
Well, he saw the tree fall on his mother when he was 4, and 4 is not an age 4 is an age where kids worry about their parents dying anyway. Then I was taken out in an ambulance, and then I didn't come home for 6 weeks. And he came to see me in the hospital once, which was probably a mistake because he saw tubes and hospital stuff, so it was traumatic for him to see. And then he would go to school, like 6 months later he was in school, and the teacher stood up and said, "Guess what, kids? Hugo's coming," which was the mascot of the Hornets basketball team. And my son thought, well, I don't want to be here when Hugo comes, so he acted up and pushed the pencils off of everybody's desk, and he was sent home. So I got a call at the bank saying, "Come get your son. He's misbehaving." So I picked him up, and we talked about it that night. I said, "What happened today?" Because it wasn't really like him. And he said, "Well, they said Hugo's coming tomorrow, and I don't want to be there. I want to be with you." Well, that makes sense to a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old at that point. But the teachers couldn't pay attention to that with 30 kids in the class. So there was times like that where in his mind something had happened, and if you told him something, he wouldn't just trust you because we had told him the hurricane's not coming, and we were wrong. So when you have a child who doesn't trust adults, and then he needed specificity, so at 6 o'clock, if I said dinner's at 6, which I learned not to say, it might be 6:10. And he said, yeah, it was a promise, where's dinner? So life is difficult for someone who needs that level of predictability, and so we had to adapt as much as we could, but also help him deal with the world. And he went through a lot of anger and a lot of frustration, and what they told us is that 4-year-olds, which is like Katrina victims, I heard, the terror goes in at a 4-year-old level, and you grow up, but your terror doesn't. So the fear is still a child, and so you hear things differently. And you can't process it as an adult, so you have to deal with kind of two people, because he was an adolescent who had a 4-year-old terror. And so we had to learn how to bring that out and respond to it as you would a 4-year-old, which the 13-year-old doesn't want you to do. It was very complicated, but we learned a lot.
Not to reduce things to labels, but was there a condition?
Well, they called it bipolar for a while, and then they took off that label saying it was a post-traumatic diagnosis. Now he has no diagnosis. He's not on any medication. He's a calm, thoughtful, wonderful young man who needed to go through this process, and I'm sure that was part of his sacred contract. But he really understands pain, and he understands, when I talk to him, we'll go deeper than anybody else, because he just goes right there, and he picks up on things. So he's just a wonderful young adult. He's 32 now.
How would you explain what sacred contracts mean to you?
What it means to me is just simply all of the experiences of people in my life I chose, because it was the only way I could learn what I learned in those circumstances. So when you say I brought Hugo on, well, I didn't consciously do that, but I learned some things about the value of my time and balance and my commitment to my family that I'm not sure I would have learned as quickly, but I learned it in a swoop. Raising Adam taught me a lot about when I see parents who just think that they can take credit for what their children have become. I think kids do a lot more work than we know about themselves. And we had to do a lot of changing to be the right kind of parents for him, or good enough parents, not right. So in each of those things, I feel like really did shape me. And I'm not sure I can be, when I'm going through something, like if I'm trying to apply it right now to my hibernation period. I mean, I'm working, but it's not the thing yet. I just have to know that this time is part of what I planned before I came. And that makes me accept it a little better. But it just helps me make sense of it. And so if someone tells me something dramatic or traumatic, I don't push back. I kind of go, all right, well, let's talk about that. Let's think about what you might be learning.
Are you more interested in bringing people to their essential selves and what they truly yearn for in life than simply having them be more efficient at work?
Yes, exactly. And that's what when I coach people, it's usually, first, do you like your role? Do you want to stay in it? Do you want to progress? Then, if the answer is yes to all that, we'll deal with the organizational issues. But if they don't, that could be why it's not working, because they don't want to be there.
What do you value most?
For me, honesty and connecting with people. I'm most fueled when I can connect with people. I think that happens when people are honest about themselves, what they don't know, and I also value curiosity. People who are not curious anymore are kind of done. Mm-hmm. But in this world, things are changing so fast, we have to be curious about ourselves and and those things. Because I don't know everything, I don't have all the answers, but I'm curious about them. Mm-hmm. So curiosity, honesty, and opening yourself up to connection.
Thanks, Karen.
My pleasure.
Karen Geiger is the owner of Karen Geiger Associates. She is a leadership and organizational development advisor to corporate and nonprofit clients. She earned an undergraduate degree in sociology at the University of Rochester, a master's degree in education at Indiana University-Bloomington, and a Ph.D. in leadership and change at Antioch University. And now, a personal word. When Karen Geiger talks about the value of time and living life on her own terms, I'm drawn to a very different idea of an MBA. In a class I teach called The Good Life, we ask the question, how do we live good lives? What does it take to lead a full, thriving, and meaningful life in community? How do we avoid misliving? We look at these questions across disciplines, through the lens of philosophy, psychology, literature, leadership theory, and the arts. This past week, we explored what positive psychology has to tell us about happiness. Traditional psychology seeks to repair our weaknesses by treating pathologies and mental illness. In contrast, positive psychology seeks to build on our strengths by developing what leads to well-being. Martin Seligman, a psychologist at the forefront of the positive psychology movement, talks about 5 pillars that support and are signs of a highly functioning and fulfilled life. 1. Positive emotions like joy, love, and serenity. 2. Engagement or active participation in the events of life and community. 3. Relationships with others that are secure and enriching. 4. Finding who we are and what we do worthwhile and significant. And 5, accomplishments, having authentic and earned pride in what we achieve. Key habits or strategies for happiness include being in flow. Flow is absorption in one's work that is a perfect blend of challenge and skill. Creative insight is heightened and time flies by. Having more flow in our lives makes us happier. Another habit or strategy for being happy is practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness is being in the present moment. It is fully attending to what is happening, both outside us and within us. We can become more mindful through any conscious intention and movement. A third key habit or strategy for being happy is learned optimism. The idea of learned optimism is that we can cultivate resilience and empowerment. We can practice replacing negative self-talk with positive thoughts and behaviors, and gain a greater internal sense that we control events and outcomes. All of these ideas help us determine ourselves, to self-determine, to become our true and best selves. A popular concept within positive psychology is the acronym MBA, short for Mastery, Belonging, and Autonomy. MBA is what we want in our lives. It is what drives and motivates us to achieve. Mastery is highly skilled competence in what we enjoy. Belonging is connection to higher purposes. Autonomy is control and independence. This is where Karen Geiger comes in. Karen Geiger helps people and organizations earn their MBA every day. She helps others live good lives. You've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Thank you to my partners Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value. Visit us also on our website, on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.